England and France hated each other for over 700 years. Hated. So much that France almost disappeared entirely. And it all started with the 100 Years' War. 3 million people died in that war. To put that in perspective, England had just 5 million people at the time. And yes, Joan of Arc was right in the thick of it. A 17-year-old girl commanding an entire army. Plus, this war was the first in Europe to see cannons used on a massive scale. The 100 Years' War officially lasted 116 years, but truth be told, it's still echoing today. Even not too long ago, the French and English were at it again, squabbling over land. When I was prepping this episode, my head nearly exploded from the sheer number of events, dates, and characters. But I untangled it all, and I promise you, there's no simpler, clearer guide to this story than what you're about to see. Today, I'm going to show you how a simple fight over a throne turned into a drawn-out war, and how that very war gave birth to two of Europe's first real nations, the English and the French. I'll tell you the story of the 100 Years' War, bringing every twist, battle, and hero to life, as if it all happened yesterday. The 100 Years' War didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was set in motion 250 years before it even started, and it all began with one event. In 1066, the Duke of Normandy, William the Conqueror, crossed the English Channel and seized England. He became king. But here's the twist. Even after conquering England, William stayed Duke of Normandy. Technically, that meant he owed loyalty to the French king. William, he didn't care. Back then, kings weren't all powerful. Their dukes were often richer, stronger, and more independent. Swearing fealty was one thing. Doing what they wanted was another. The result? England lost to a French duke, but gained Normandy, a slice of French land. 100 years later, things got messier. A new duke controlling most of France had no sons. His inheritance passed to his daughter, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Suddenly, she owned half of France. Eventually, Eleanor married the French king, Louis VII. They had a few children, all daughters. And by the laws of the time, crowns can only pass from father to son. So the marriage ended. Eleanor kept her lands, Louis kept his. Later, Eleanor married again, this time to the Duke of Normandy and heir to the English throne, Henry II. 2 years later, Henry became king, and all of Eleanor's lands automatically became English. These were the richest regions of France. Vineyards, vital ports, fertile fields. Louis VII was understandably not happy. He tried to take them back by force. By the time the 100 Years' War officially began, 150 years later, England and France had already fought 13 separate wars. In the end, England lost almost all its French lands, keeping only the Duchy of Gascony, with Bordeaux as its capital. Both then and now, Bordeaux produces some of the world's finest wines. England controlled the wine trade and made more money from it than from the rest of England combined. The locals of Bordeaux welcomed the English as both sides grew rich from trade. So whenever French kings tried to reclaim the land, they faced resistance from both the English and the locals. To weaken this resistance, the French allied with Scotland. The Scots had been fighting England for years. Now with French money and weapons, they ramped up attacks on northern England. For the English, this was a problem, so they found an ally too, Flanders, today parts of Belgium and the Netherlands. Flanders cities produced high-quality textiles sold all over Europe. To make these fabrics, they needed wool from England. Even though Flanders technically answers to the French king, the locals sided more with England because their trade depended on it. Eventually, the French king noticed and banned Flanders from trading with England. Flanders obeyed, but the tension was set. As you can see, England and France had been enemies for years, each hunting for allies, building armies, preparing for war. And now, the final spark appears. In 1328, the French king Charles IV dies. No sons. His daughters cannot inherit the throne. The crown must go to a close relative. That relative, Edward III, King of England. But French nobles have other plans. They refuse an English king ruling France, so they crown another claimant, Philip VI of Valois. He declares England has no right to Gascony. That's all Edward needs. He declares war. It's risky. France is 5 times larger with 15 million people. England has only 5 million. Fewer people equals less tax revenue for the army. England lacks funds for a big war. Edward borrows from Italian bankers in Florence and Venice at high interest rates. His hope? Win, loot France, pay the debt. He gathers an army. In 1337, he lands in Flanders. Locals hail him as a liberator. From there, his 12,000-strong army pushes into France using chevauché tactics: raid, loot, burn, and retreat. The English bring no supplies. They live off the land. French peasants flee south, where Philip VII slowly assembles his army. And slow it is. No standing French army exists yet. The king calls his vassals, who call theirs. Months pass. Finally, Philip gathers 20,000 troops and marches towards Edward. Months later, armies meet, but the battle hasn't started. The French take high ground, waiting. They know their numbers are superior. Edward doubts victory. His funds are gone, no major castles captured. The English refuse to attack. They retreat empty-handed. Italian bankers demand repayment, but Edward's treasury is bare. One option remains: raise taxes. Still, funds are insufficient. Edward knows he must return to France, capture a city or port. French spies catch wind and plan to intercept at sea. They block the landing at Sluys. England's navy? Weak. Mostly fishing or merchant ships taken from the populace. Still, Edward orders a breakthrough. In June 1340, battle begins. English archers fire from distance. French sailors, lightly armored, face heavily armored English knights. In close combat, the French are destroyed. Flemish reinforcements strike from the rear, routing the French. France loses almost its entire fleet, 190 ships. England now controls the Channel, free to move troops. Riding the momentum, Edward decides he can claim the French crown. On September 26, 1340, Edward III declares himself King of England and France. After this, the English raid northern France, moving from town to town. Full conquest? Impossible. England lacks manpower and siege engines. Philip VI exploits this delay, convincing Scotland to attack England, saving France. Edward rushes home to defend his lands, empty-handed again. England signs a 5-year truce just to buy time. The truce ends in 1346. England plans to resume the war, but needs money. Edward scares the populace, claiming France is preparing an attack. The English believe him, raising funds. Italian bankers remain unpaid. Edward faces bankruptcy, angry subjects, ruined reputation, until he hatches a clever plan. He spreads rumors of a landing in southern Gascony. Philip believes it, sending a large army south, but the English land in the north where no one expects them. They seize the city loaded with treasures. Edward can now pay his army, settle debts. High on victory, the English march towards Paris. Philip VI scrambles, marching his southern army north to intercept. Edward retreats before they arrive. The French order Philip to pursue and destroy the English. He obeys, chasing Edward without waiting for reinforcements. The two armies meet near Crécy, 1346. 15,000 English versus 20,000 French. The French army is Europe's strongest, with mounted knights, medieval tanks. Italian crossbowmen can pierce any armor. Edward's smaller army, battle-hardened from years fighting Scots, Welsh, and Irish. Edward orders knights off their horses, forming a defensive line on a hill, bait for the French. They dig pits and flank with archers. French dismiss archers, while in England, every boy learns the bow from age 7. Battle begins. French crossbowmen approach. Rain turns the ground to mud. Crossbows misfire. Bolts fall short. English archers' volleys rain true, forcing crossbowmen to flee. French knights charge, trampling their own men. Arrows strike again. English archers shoot 6 times per minute, thousands of them. A storm of arrows knocks French knights off horses. Some reach English lines, but knights cut them down. French command collapses. Attacks fail 16 times. Battle rages until night. Philip VI orders retreat, losing 15,000 men. England wins decisively. After the victory at Crécy, Edward III doesn't rush straight to Paris. Instead, he turns back north. He knows one thing: his army isn't strong enough to take the whole capital, and he needs reinforcements. To get them, the King of England sets his sights on the coastal city of Calais, a major port perfect for sending troops and supplies into France. By August 1347, Calais falls, and Edward transforms it into a military base, a springboard for attacks across the country. Back in England, though, disaster strikes. A plague spreads like wildfire, the Black Death. Within a few years, it wipes out 1/3 of Europe's population. Kings sign truce after truce and retreat behind castle walls. Calais remains in English hands. Fighting halts, mostly. But on the Brittany Peninsula, war rages over the ducal title. England backs one candidate, France the other. So, even with the truce, fighting continues, just somewhere else. And that leads to unusual battles like the Battle of the 30. At one point, the French and English armies just get a little bored and decide to hold a nightly tournament. But these aren't your usual jousts. 30 English knights face 30 French knights. Judges, medics, and spectators watch closely. The rule is simple and brutal. The side that loses the most men loses. 8 hours of relentless combat follow. In the end, the French triumph, 24-21. Meanwhile, the plague recedes, but not before killing King Philip VI of France. In 1350, his son ascends the throne, Jean II, the Good. The treasury is empty, and English raids keep hitting villages across the land. Edward III still hesitates to return with a full army. Instead, he perfects his chevauchée tactics. Small bands of 1,000 knights strike fear into northern and southern France. They take what they can and burn the rest. Edward's goal? Show the French that their king is weak, that he cannot protect his people. Jean II suddenly finds himself with new enemies rallying around Charles the Bad. Ruling the small kingdom of Navarre, Charles inherited lands in northern France from his mother and spends much of his time there. A distant relative of the king, he dreams of the French throne. One day, he clashes with one of Jean II's top commanders and orders him killed. When the commander dies, Charles doesn't even hide his involvement. Jean II retaliates, attacking Charles's lands. Charles the Bad scrambles for survival. He strikes a deal with Edward III, opening his ports to the English army. The French king panics and vows not to punish him if he breaks the agreement. Charles agrees. But Charles betrays Edward III and flips back to France, while secretly plotting to overthrow the French king. When this plot is discovered, he's thrown into prison. Edward III still cannot deploy his full army to France. On top of that, Scotland attacks England again. He sends only a small force led by his son, also named Edward. He goes down in history as the Black Prince. At just 25, he's already proven himself at Crécy. Now his father entrusts him to lead the chevauchée. While Jean II raises his army, the Black Prince's forces loot 20 towns. With only 7,000 men, the Black Prince's army faces a new threat. The French finally gather their forces, and the English start to retreat. But escape isn't easy. The French catch up near Poitiers. By now, the Black Prince's army is exhausted. Food and water are gone. The English are ready to surrender. The Black Prince offers a deal. Return everything you've taken, and we go free. But King Jean II refuses. The stage is set. The battle begins. The French have learned from their past mistakes. This time, most knights dismount. Those who remain on horseback protect their horses with metal plating. But one thing doesn't change: their organization and discipline. The commanders still ignore the king, deciding for themselves when and whom to attack. And that sparks chaos. The Black Prince's archers hide in the marshes near the battlefield, picking off the French with deadly precision. Then, at the last possible moment, the Black Prince unleashes his mounted knights, crushing the French forces. Part of the army flees. The rest are captured. Among the prisoners, 30 high-ranking nobles and King Jean II of France himself. The Black Prince sends him to London. There, Jean lives comfortably, respected, invited to banquets and hunts. But it's still captivity, and his freedom comes with a price: 3 million gold coins. That's 2 full years of France's budget. And speaking of budget, helping out yesterday doesn't take much. You can support us on Patreon starting from just $1 a month. And for $3, as a little token of our appreciation, we'll even mention your name in the video. Thank you in advance. We really appreciate all the support. Meanwhile, back home, trouble is brewing. The king is in captivity, and his eldest son, Dauphin Charles, the heir, is too weak to rule. English forces resume raiding villages, while French soldiers, instead of protecting the people, seize grain for the army. Dauphin Charles scrambles to collect taxes to ransom his father, but the Parisians won't cooperate, and in 1358 they rise in rebellion. Armed citizens captured Dauphin Charles. They freed Charles the Bad from prison. He leads the Parisian uprising, demanding compensation and the return of his lands. The Dauphin agrees. But problems keep mounting. Around Paris, a peasant revolt known as the Jacquerie erupts. Exhausted from constant exploitation, peasants attack noble estates. The Dauphin flees Paris, and Charles the Bad promises to negotiate with the rebels for a reward. He invites peasant leaders to talks and then kills them. Without leadership, the Jacquerie are crushed swiftly. After this, Parisians no longer trust Charles the Bad, feeling betrayed. They expel him from the city. He returns to the English just in time. Meanwhile, Edward III and Jean II sign a treaty in London, aiming to finally end the war. Under this treaty, England gains half of France and receives compensation. Edward III renounces claims to the French crown and will release Jean II. But Paris rejects the terms. Dauphin Charles rallies the French to fight, not for their king, but for France itself. In that moment, the French nation begins to take shape. When Edward III learns the French won't accept his terms, he raises an army and marches on Paris. In open battle, the English are unbeatable. But taking a city? That's another story. Edward's army reaches Paris and simply camps outside the walls. The English king hopes the Parisians will sally out and fight, but Dauphin Charles knows the English can't storm the city, so he waits. Edward lingers for 2 weeks, then retreats to raid the countryside. But trouble soon finds the English. Soldiers fall to disease during the long march. Autumn brings cold, relentless rain and mud that swallows horses. One day, a massive hailstorm strikes, lightning ripping through the ranks, maiming soldiers. Edward loses 1,000 men and 6,000 horses. The English see it as divine punishment, and the king agrees to soften his demands and make peace. In 1360, the agreement is sealed. England takes a third of French lands, the king's ransom is reduced, and Edward abandons claim to the French throne. Dauphin Charles reconciles with Charles the Bad, restoring his claim to French lands. King Jean II finally returns home, but he cannot raise his ransom, so he voluntarily returns to captivity, where he dies in 1364. His son becomes the new king, Charles V the Wise. He inherits a France that is plundered, humiliated, and devastated by plague. Charles V, the Wise, knows England isn't done. They'll be back, aiming to take every inch of its lands. So, he makes a bold move. He strengthens his army. France imposes a mandatory war tax, hires professional soldiers, and builds a standing army ready for battle. Then the king trains his archers, determined they won't fall behind the English. Leading the new French army is Bertrand du Guesclin, who immediately proves himself against Charles the Bad. In 1364, Charles the Bad tries once more to seize Paris and claim the crown, but du Guesclin crushes his army. After this crushing defeat, Charles retreats to Navarre, never again attempting war against France. Meanwhile, a new front opens in the 100-Year War, Castile, modern-day Spain, where a battle for the throne rages. France and England jump in again, backing rival claimants. Charles V sends du Guesclin with his army, while England sends the Black Prince. The Black Prince wins in Castile. England places their man on the throne, only for him to betray them, refusing to pay for their help. The Black Prince is stuck. He returns to Gascony unable to pay his army. The only option left: raise taxes. But the locals revolt with the French help. He has no choice but to go back to London. In Castile, he falls ill and can no longer command his troops. Seeing an opportunity, the French king strikes. In 1369, war is back on. Du Guesclin shifts tactics. No more huge pitched battles. Instead, surprise attacks, raiding English detachments and supply lines, wearing the enemy down. With Castilian allies, the French smash the English fleet and raid the English coast. Edward III responds with chevauchée raids, but du Guesclin finds ways to counter even them. Villagers are ordered to burn their homes, destroy food, and hide behind castle walls, leaving nothing for the English to loot. By 1376, du Guesclin had reclaimed nearly all of France's lost lands, without ever fighting a single major battle. That same year, the Black Prince dies of illness. Edward III is too old to fight, and a year later, he dies as well. The throne passes to the Black Prince's son, Edward II, who immediately faces trouble with Scotland and a peasant uprising. England pauses the war with France for several years, especially since France is dealing with its own issues. In 1380, the great commander Bertrand du Guesclin dies after drinking cold water in the summer heat. 2 months later, the French king dies. His successor, 12-year-old Charles VI, the Mad. Too young to rule, his uncles govern in his place. Only in 1388 does Charles VI take full control, backed by the military and the nobility. France seems poised for prosperity. A young king on the throne, England no longer a threat, and the country rebuilding. But in the summer of 1392, during a scorching heat wave, the French army marches on. As always, the king is flanked by his knights. One falls asleep in the saddle, crashes off his horse, and takes down a nearby knight. The 23-year-old king grabs his sword and, shouting, "Treachery!" attacks his own guards. While being restrained, Charles VI kills several men. Strange behaviors had been noticed before. Sudden grimaces, fits of rage, then calm, as if nothing happened. One day in Paris, at a masquerade, the king and 5 courtiers dress as savages. Their costumes, made of linen and hemp fibers, mimic animal fur. Someone accidentally brings a torch too close. The costumes ignite. 4 courtiers die, but the king is saved by a young duchess who smothers the flames with her dress. After one wild, chaotic party, Charles VI completely loses his mind. Sometimes he's convinced he's made out of glass, so he starts wandering around in armor just in case he falls and shatters. Days pass without him bathing. He soils himself, dances naked, and attacks his own servants. His wife, Isabella of Bavaria, finally flees the palace. Charles can no longer recognize her. From time to time, she even takes over running the country in his place. Occasionally, his sanity returns, but year after year, his madness only deepens. And of course, Charles's relatives, uncles, and cousins exploit this chaos. They start fighting for power, each trying to grab as much land and influence as possible. This sparks a civil war in France. Two noble families go head-to-head, the Burgundians and the Armagnacs. Each wants to manipulate the king for their own gain. When Charles is lucid, they strong-arm him into signing over land and titles, and when he falls into his madness again, they turn on each other. On top of that, both families try and forge alliances with England, hoping for support in the Civil War, but England isn't exactly rushing to help. Richard II, son of the Black Prince, doesn't want to fight with France, so in 1396 he signs a peace treaty. This angers the English nobility, and the king's authority begins to crumble. A few years later, his uncle John of Gaunt dies, a man who had always backed Richard with troops and money. Richard never thanks him. He just seizes all of John's lands for himself. But John's son Henry refuses to accept this. He raises a rebellion against the king. In 1399, Richard II is overthrown, and Henry becomes the new king, Henry IV. A new dynasty, the Lancasters, take the English throne. Just as Henry IV begins thinking about war with France, another uprising erupts in Wales. Locals rebel over crop failures, famine, and crushing taxes. Henry IV spends most of his reign handling internal crises until his death in 1413. His son Henry V takes the throne. Henry sees that France is weak, still torn apart by the Burgundians and Armagnacs, and decides to strike. In August 1415, he attacks. England sends a small but elite army, 6,000 longbowmen and 2,000 knights. Their plan is simple: raid a weakened France, grab as much loot as possible, and return home. The Burgundians refuse to fight. They profit too much from trade, so only the Armagnacs face Henry's army. They meet near the town of Agincourt, and the French outnumber the English several times over. Yet even with superior numbers, the French aren't sure they can win. They vividly remember the legendary English longbowmen who had brought England countless victories. French knights despise these archers, not just for their deadly accuracy, but because the arrows were soaked in manure, spreading infection with every hit. Captured archers had their fingers cut off so they could never shoot again. Before battles, the English would taunt the French by holding up two fingers, mocking them. Legend says this is where the iconic victory gesture comes from, which would explode in popularity centuries later. At Agincourt, the French repeat the same mistakes in previous battles: reckless charges, panic, chaos. The English unleash 30,000 arrows per minute. France crumbles. In the final push, King Henry V personally leads his troops in the last attack. The French start fleeing and surrendering. 3,000 French soldiers die. The English lose only a few hundred. What was meant to be a small-scale raid turned into a sweeping victory. France is suddenly within Henry's grasp. He returns to England, raises an even larger army, and 2 years later strikes France again. This time, no one stands in his way. The Armagnacs are defeated, and the Burgundians are now English allies. Henry enters Paris, captures the Mad King, and opens the city gates to the English. In 1420, both sides sign a treaty. The French crown will pass to Henry V. When that happens, England and France will officially unite, and independent France will simply vanish. To unite England and France under one crown and make Henry V king of both countries, the current king, Charles VI the Mad, has to die. While everyone waits, the King of England marries Charles's daughter, Catherine of Valois. A year later, they have a son, Henry. But the Mad King refuses to die. Henry V waits patiently. He's barely 30, and time seems to favor him. Yet, nothing goes as planned. Henry V contracts dysentery and dies at 34. Charles VI outlives him by just 2 months, then also passes away. By the treaty, the only king of both France and England is Henry VI, son of Henry V and Catherine of Valois. But he's just 2 years old, far too young to rule. This opens the door for Charles VI's son, Charles VII, who, together with the Armagnacs, plots to reclaim the throne. He controls southern France. Up north, the English and Burgundians hold the land. To be a true king, tradition demands Charles VII be crowned in Reims. Problem, Reims is deep in English territory. Charles VII can't take it. His army is demoralized, thinking defense, not attack. After Agincourt, everyone believes the English are unbeatable. And now they have a formidable commander, John Talbot, who's won 47 battles without a single loss. Yet Charles VII refuses to surrender. He calls on old allies, the Scots. They arrive in France and, shockingly, win several battles against the English and Burgundians. But then, the tide turns. Talbot's forces push the French and Scots south. By October 1428, the English surround Orléans, the Armagnac capital. If it falls, England could march on to conquer all of France. This is where history starts to feel like legend. Out of nowhere, a 17-year-old peasant girl, Joan of Arc, enters the scene and changes the course of the war. She claims visions of a messenger from God, commanding her to go to King Charles VII and help free Orléans and all of France from the English. She sets out, but no one lets her see the king. So, Joan approaches one of his commanders and explains her mission. He laughs and throws her in prison. Yet there, she somehow predicts the outcome of the next French battle. On February 12, 1429, the English supply their army outside Orléans with 300 wagons of salted fish. The French attack the convoy and blast it with cannons. The field is littered with herring from the broken wagons. This becomes the Battle of the Herrings. French knights charge, but their horses slip on the fish-strewn grounds, giving the English a crucial edge. When this commander holding Joan learns that she predicted this, he finally believes her and sends her to Charles VII. The king trusts her as well. France has nothing left to lose. The English control half the country. The rightful king is still uncrowned, and the army is exhausted. On top of that, people are deeply religious and trusting. A divine messenger appearing isn't unbelievable, and a prophecy already foretold that France would be saved by a girl. People believed a woman could ruin France, but a virgin could save it. Under the woman, everyone sees the wife of Charles VI, Isabella of Bavaria, who betrayed her son and sided with the English. Under the virgin, there is Joan of Arc. So, she asks the king for a small army. And on May 1429, she marches with him on a daring counterattack at Orléans. The presence of this divine messenger electrifies the French knights. They launch wave after wave of attacks and force the English to retreat from beneath the city. Young Joan fights shoulder to shoulder with the other knights. She's even struck by a crossbow bolt, but it's not fatal. After this stunning victory at Orléans, volunteers pour into the French army. The English are slowly pushed back. The next major clash comes at the town of Poitiers. There, the French annihilate a 5,000-strong English army and capture their famed commander, John Talbot. By July 17, 1429, the French march triumphantly into Reims. Finally, Charles VII is crowned king. To honor Joan, he grants her a noble title and dubs her the Maid of Orléans. But Joan isn't stopping there. She wants to drive the English completely out of France. Her independence, her boldness grows with every battle. In September 1429, she launches an assault on Paris, but the attack is poorly planned. Joan is hit in the thigh, and ultimately the English repel her forces. Her reputation as the Maid of Orléans takes a heavy blow. By year's end, she hasn't delivered any major victories for France. In the spring of 1430, Joan, with a few hundred volunteers, heads to the fortress of Compiègne, under siege by the Burgundians. There she is defeated and captured. Joan attempts to escape twice, but fails. Eventually, the Burgundians sell her to the English. In January 1431, in Rouen, Joan faces trial. She's labeled a witch and accused of wearing men's clothing. The church court hands her over to the city authorities, who burn her at the stake on May 30th, 1431. But why didn't King Charles VII save Joan? Because he believed French victories weren't solely her doing. Since the time of Charles V the Wise, French kings have been building a professional army. They transformed unruly bands of knights used to fighting as they pleased into a disciplined, regular force. Joan didn't fit into this system. For the last 6 months, she ignored commands. Her confidence grated on everyone. Even on their final campaign, she went without permission. Her biggest problem, she hated the Burgundians, while Charles VII was trying to negotiate with them. He wanted peace in his kingdom and understood that to drive out the English, he first had to unite all of the French. In his mind, Joan was in the way. So Charles VII could only execute his plan after her death. In 1435, he signs a peace treaty with the Burgundians, and a year later, the united French army drives the English out of Paris. Retaking French cities is made easier by new artillery. The French build cannons of every size, from small ones firing at knights to massive guns hurling 300-kilogram stone balls. Storming cities becomes easier. Old walls crumble under bombardment. In over 13 years, the French reclaim 60 towns. The English are pushed almost entirely out of northern France. Next, the French push south, reclaiming Gascony, the place where the 100 Years' War began. In July 1453, the Battle of Castillon takes place. French brings 300 cannons. The English are led by 70-year-old John Talbot, the very invincible commander Joan had once defeated. He's released from captivity after swearing never to fight again. But Talbot underestimates the power of artillery, and the French fire on the English before they even reach the battlefield. Talbot himself falls from his horse, trapped underneath, and is killed instantly when the French reach him. On October 19, 1453, the last major English city, Bordeaux, surrenders. The 100 Years' War is finally over. But England and France never sign a formal peace treaty. They continue to clash sporadically. Even up to 1801, English kings still claimed the French crown. Either way, the English never reclaim French lands. King Henry VI of England takes the defeat hard and one day simply loses his mind, just like his grandfather, Charles VI. This sparks England's civil war between the Lancasters and the Yorks, later called the War of the Roses. The only English holdout in France is Calais, captured by Edward III. The French only reclaim it in 1558, over 100 years after the 100 Years' War ended. So technically, this war could be called 200 years long, and if you count from William the Conqueror's invasion of England, it stretches 500 years. The French and English were constantly at war, but during the 100 Years' War, they fought for their nation. Before, people identified with regions, Gascon, Parisian, Londoner. Now, they see themselves as French or English. During this period, English gains real importance as a language. Before the war, the elite spoke French, and now everyone recognizes it as the enemy's tongue. England and France continue to clash until the mid-20th century. The last time is in World War II, when Britain fights French dictator Philippe Pétain, a Nazi collaborator. Only in 1949, when both countries join NATO, does this centuries-long rivalry effectively end. And even then, not entirely. Today, Britain still controls the Channel Islands, ancient French lands France never reclaimed after the 100 Years' War. In the latter half of the 20th century, tensions flare as oil and gas are discovered nearby. France wants the islands back, but the UN sides with Britain, which has held them for 1,000 years. French nationalists even land there several times to plant their flag. the British promptly remove it. Just a few years ago, after Brexit, French sailors were banned from fishing there, sparking threats to block British ports and cut electricity to the islands from France. This dispute is the final echo of the 100 Years' War. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to check out our previous video as well. In that one, we dive into the true story of the Inquisition. You'll find the link waiting for you in the description. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. This was yesterday. We'll see you next time.